continuing our picks, predicting the entire NHL. We know season started at this point. We're going to keep running with it because the way that I kind of think of it, the first 2 or 3 weeks of the NHL is kind of like week one of the NFL, where like we saw it last year where the Oilers started the year 4-14 or whatever. You can't really it shouldn't taint your opinion of teams because of the fact that it doesn't necessarily change a lot. Like anything can happen in the first week. Like and I think it's Anthony Stolarz for the Toronto Maple Leafs could shut out his first 4 games and then have an 890 save percentage for the rest of the year. It's just how it goes. Like that's the first few. That's the first few weeks of the NHL. So we'll see what happens. We're gonna just keep on rolling with it as the season continues here. Starting off, or not starting off, continuing on with the Atlantic here. With obviously a lot of very good teams in this division. A lot of teams that are trying to move up and have been trying to for the last few years, and a lot of teams who have kind of just owned this division for the last little while. Obviously, home of the Boston Bruins, Toronto Maple Leafs, teams like that, Tampa Bay Lightning, who have been sitting at the top of this division for 5, 6, 7 years now. Bunch of young teams trying to push up, and I think the big conversation with it is how much do you value the youth on those younger teams, and how much do you think those older teams will be able to hold on to their spots? So we can get right into it. Talking about the team right at the bottom of probably both of our lists, assuming that, Caleb, you don't necessarily have any shockers here, and that is the Montreal Canadiens. I'm assuming, yeah, you're nodding your head. I'm assuming that is exactly where you landed on it too. They're bad. It's funny when we were going into this, I really didn't think that they were going to be that bad. They're rough, man. They have a rough team. The first thing I said to you is, I think their depth is terrible. I just don't really see what they've really got to offer. As for like, I just don't know. They just don't have a lot. Like, forward depth is a little bit better, but defensive depth, they don't really have a lot there. Goalies, I mean, they've had the same 2 guys for the last few years here, and it hasn't really worked for them. I don't know. I think I expected this to be a pretty big breakout year for them, with a lot of their younger guys going into, like, 3rd or 4th years at this point. Nick Suzuki's been turning into one of the better two-way forwards in the NHL. Cole Caulfield's ready to really bloom into the sniper that he is, and it was looking like Slavkovsky was turning into something as well. But I don't know. The rest of this division is so nuts that I have a really hard time seeing them move up. I don't really know whose spot they would steal. Second last season was Ottawa, and they've gotten a lot better, picking up Allmark, obviously, solving one of their biggest issues in net. And you can't necessarily say the same thing about the Canadiens. A lot of their issues haven't really been solved. They are still kind of the same team from last year.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, it is really just sad to see from where we were in the COVID year. I mean, that was a bit of a miracle run when they went to the Cup, but a lot of those same core pieces are still there, but just the rest of the team has kind of fallen out around them. Like, there's a lot of good pieces on this team to where I don't think it's going to be I don't think it's going to be like a complete dumpster fire. Like, they'll win some games, but in terms of this division, I don't think they have too much of a chance to get past anybody in front of them. You love the young talent, you love the Caulfields, the Suzukis, you're right, Slavkovsky's doing better. But once you get kind of into the second line or third line, it's a lot of players who have regressed to a certain point. I mean, you see like Brandon Gallagher on the 4th line.
Yeah.
It just shows how it's to a certain point where I feel like 2020 was almost the perfect intersection of where a lot of the veterans they had were hitting like a peak in their career, and you get kind of the young energy of like a Caulfield or a Suzuki. Like, it all came together at just the right time to make a miracle run. But now you're at the point where, yes, the young guys are kind of coming into their own, but the older talent is falling more by the wayside. And like, especially I look on defense and it scares me a lot with the lack of talent there. and particularly in goal. Like I think
Yeah.
the forward lines, especially like in the top six, it's still pretty good to where I'd put it up. I'd at least I don't know if I'd say it's to the same level, but I think you could at least put it up against some of the other top sixes in this division.
Oh yeah.
But everything past that, it kind of is really concerning to the point where I wouldn't feel comfortable putting them any higher than last.
Yeah.
Really.
And the thing is, and you point that out, and I think that's the really important distinction I think with this Montreal team is the fact that we haven't seen them be able to do that yet. Like I love Nick Suzuki, I love Cole Caulfield. I think they're both great players, but we haven't seen them be able to elevate bad teams yet. Like that just hasn't happened. They have consistently just not been great, and I think it's not necessarily their fault. There's very few players in the NHL that can elevate bad teams to that level, and it's not necessarily their responsibility to ensure that the players around them are good. This year, it's just not looking great. I think, like you said, their top six, I like it a lot. Kirby Dach was good for them last year as well. Alex Newhook, a good pickup. I mean, even that third line isn't terrible either, but it's just, I don't know. I don't really see them doing anything crazy this year. I think they look better. I think they look like a really fun team this year, but I don't think that it necessarily turns into anything any crazy success as for climbing the rankings a little bit. But we can move on. I think we should move on as if we want to run through this a little bit faster than we usually do. To the team that would be the second last spot here, last year being the Ottawa Senators. I don't know if Caleb, you want to go off of my list for who's in seventh here. If you want,
we can go off of your list if you want.
Okay. For my team, and this might seem shocking to some people, because last season they didn't exactly have a good year. They a lot of people thought they'd be a lot better than they were, and were very disappointed. I believe they ended up finishing in sixth. I'm kind of like stalling because I'm trying to get there, but yep, they finished in sixth with 39 wins, 37 losses. I have them falling a spot here, not necessarily because I think they do worse, but because I think that the teams around them got a lot better, and that is the Buffalo Sabres. I love this team. I've loved it for the last little while. I love Devin Levi. I love that top line. Peyton Krebs, Tage Thompson, Alex Tuck. I believe it's Tuck. They have so many pieces that I absolutely love. But God, they just haven't been able to make it work, and it really sucks. Like, I don't really know what you could do to fix this team. I feel like the funny thing is I look at it, I don't like the depth on this squad either. Jason Zucker on that third line is pretty impressive, honestly, but I mean, at this point, he's not the same player he was. I think, I don't even know. I don't even know, man. Like, I don't know what you add to this team to necessarily get them over the hump. I think the goaltending needs to get more consistent, and maybe that comes this year. But I don't know. The team that I have above them, I just have a hard time seeing them passing with just everything across the board here. You seem to be nodding, so I'm assuming you also have the Sabres in this spot.
I'll have the Sabres in seventh.
Yeah.
I just think
it's a bit of a shock
at this
pick,
point. It's crazy considering the point that we had the Sabres in last year. I think if you look back at our predictions from last year, I think we both have them fairly high in the standings, and we thought for good reason. It looked like Tage Thompson was coming into his own as a star that could lead this team. We were both very high on Devin Levi coming in as a true number one goalie kind of thing. But that wasn't the case. And it almost to me, it's like this is kind of what you get when the rebuild doesn't necessarily work, at least on the first go. This isn't to say it will never work. This isn't to say they can't continue to bring in young talent that'll supplement this roster. But to this point, even though they've got a lot of good players, that defense looks spectacular. Like Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, and Bowen Byram is kind of crazy.
That is.
But I don't know. I look at the forwards, and there's not a ton that's inspiring me. The goaltending. Even though Luckinen was a lot better than I think a lot of people thought it's still not all the way there. It's honestly like, we'll get into this later, but it really is like you've got kind of a tier of teams that have established themselves in this division, and they've been perennial playoff contenders for the last like 5, 6, 7 years, however long it's been. And then you've got like the tier, then you've got the Canadians at the bottom, but then the 3 teams in the middle are kind of just like this weird, like, do you feel like for the last 5 years they've been the precipice on the been on the precipice of the next big thing, where we're always like, this next year will be the year that the Sabres break out and make the playoffs and get some good momentum. And I feel like we could have said that for every single one of these teams. And that's why I found this. I know you said you found this division easier to rank. I found it actually quite challenging, because I have the same opinions about this Sabres team and the teams ahead of them, in terms of, I think the rebuild projects for all 3 of these teams could have been handled a lot better, and it's frankly disappointing to see a lot of this amazing talent get wasted on a roster that I think is just substandard, and not nearly up to the quality of 4 perennial contenders. I just think in terms of comparing them to those other 2 teams, which we'll surely get to in a second, just the talent, especially on the offensive side, is not there. And as good as those young defensemen are, it's not going to be able to carry them. That first line, I think it's pretty good. But comparing it against the first lines, or even the top 6 of those other 2 teams, I'm not taking it. And it's just, frankly, for all these teams, but honestly for Buffalo more than anybody else, it's pretty disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of that. I do think that certain teams out of those 3 have done a little bit better. I do think Buffalo is the bottom of those 3, is all I will say, and we will talk about it later. But I am a lot higher up on at least one of those teams. But anyway, I'm trying to remember. I just moved around a few of my top ones because I thought about it more. That's why I was quickly just...
Okay.
Yeah. I'll explain why when we get to them. But if we're going to continue down the path of talking about my 6th now, I think you're going to get a little interesting. This one, in my opinion, this one's going to piss a few people off. This is going to piss a lot of people off. So, do you want to do this one, or do we want to do your 6th? Is what I'm
asking. Go for it. Go for it.
All right. So, we were just talking about the perennial guys who have been at the top for the longest time now.
Wow.
Teams that haven't fallen. In football, we talk about it with teams like the Steelers. They're just always there. They always go at least 8-9 or whatever, 9-8. They always pull out like a winning record, right? Like they never suck that bad to be able to fall this far. We're talking about the NHL's version of that. And in this sense, it's the Boston Bruins. I have the Boston Bruins falling all the way down to 6th, because I think that this division is so stacked, and I think that this is one of the worst teams we've seen out of them. They lost their goalie duo in one of the things that helped them for such a long time here, with 2 elite goalies that they could go to at any moment. They had a really strong defensive team. I don't like the forward core. I think a lot of things about this team, they've gotten older. I think a lot of their younger guys just aren't really ready to carry that load quite yet. And I don't know. I don't know if you're going to disagree with me a whole lot on this one. This is my big controversial opinion as well, which hopefully will help me in the comments a little bit here with all the Bruins fans I just pissed off. I do like the Bruins. Like, normally I like the Bruins. I usually cheer for them because I love what they do. I think the way they play hockey, the style, like their teams are usually run, it just works. It's a very simple system. And normally everything tells me that they'd be able to make this type of team work. Something about this year is just making me feel weird about the Bruins, man.
Very interesting. I can't say that I agree with a lot of that. I don't necessarily have them doing like that much better in the grand scheme of things, but I still have them. I have them at fourth, to reveal where I have them. So that's kind of, cusp of a playoff spot, probably getting a wild card.
Yeah.
And I think the comparison you make to the Steelers specifically, is a great one, because you look at these teams, and you, especially with the Steelers, every year there's been so many times where you look at a Steelers roster and you go, this is the year. This is the year where they're not going to have a winning record, where Mike Tomlin's streak is going to be broken, where they're not going to make the playoffs, all of this stuff. But they always do. They always do, no matter what the roster is, no matter what that team looks like, because at a certain point, when your culture is so strong and coaching is so strong and the style is so solidified, especially in a team, especially in a division where I do think it's very much tiers of teams who have established things and figured things out versus teams who are finding an identity. I do not want to take any of those teams who are struggling to find an identity and struggling to figure out how their rebuilds work, versus a Bruins team that, even if they are less talented, very much know who they are and very much still have a lot of those key pieces in place, even if a lot of the depth around them isn't very good. I have a bit more to say, but I'll let you jump in, because I think you were about to say something there.
Oh gosh, no, not really. I didn't necessarily have anything to add off of that, but I just the biggest thing that I was going to say, because I think the reaction I had, I was trying to remember. Honestly, I completely forgot what I even jumped in on. But I do think that it is fair in a lot of ways to put a few of those younger teams in front of the Bruins at this point, due to the fact that I think a lot of the reasons we saw those younger teams, and I'll just come out and say it at this point: Sabres, Red Wings, and
Ottawa.
Senators. Yeah, Senators. Like, the reason that you can diagnose exactly what went wrong for most of those teams, with the Sabres probably being the most complicated, which is why we both have them as far as they are down. They're a weird kind of thing where it's just they honestly, on paper, look like they have everything they need. Like, they picked up an elite goalie prospect who, at this point, you'd think he'd be working. They have an elite center. They have an elite defensive core. They have a good top line. They have all of that stuff. I just realized I totally left my thing on the screen. Oops. Well, that's kind of funny. Well, whatever. Anyway, they have all of those elite pieces. They just don't have... It just doesn't work. The Red Wings last year, they struggled in net. They struggled kind of all over the place, honestly. They're in a similar boat to the Sabres, but we'll talk about them when we get there. And Ottawa, in my opinion, their biggest issue was goalie, and they got all mark. So I think, at least in my opinion, I think that it's absolutely fair to say that I think the Senators are going to be better than the Bruins this year. The Red Wings, you can absolutely have it. I think it's a lot closer, and you're going to find that when we get to that spot for me. But I do think that I do think that there is an argument to be had that the Red Wings passed the Bruins this year.
Maybe. I just think I'm a little bit more solidified in the sure, but prove it to me first before I'm gonna stick my claim or anything.
That's fair.
Because this is the same stuff we've been saying. Again, like, this is the Senators and the Red Wings have both been kind of like on the up and up for the last few years, and it's like, oh yeah, once they get this, then they'll be solved, right? Sure, once the Senators get their goalie, they'll be solved. I don't necessarily know that will be
well, which is
will be true.
Yeah. Sorry.
I don't necessarily. I think maybe I'm a little bit lower on these teams, just because I feel like I've just gotten burned to a certain point where we can make all our predictions and we can make all our projections, but I think the Bruins are still going to be there when the dust settles, because that's how it's been, and it's going to take, like, it takes a lot to see these kind of dynasties fall to a certain extent, and they still have enough of a core here to where I'm saying, yeah, I don't know, like, it's still a lot of good players, like obviously Lindholm, Pasternak, Marchand, Swayman in net, Hampus Lindholm, Charlie McAvoy. Like the core is still there. Yeah, that bottom six looks a little bit rough, but you can say that about Ottawa and Detroit as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just on a pure basis of who we know the Bruins to be, seeing the Red Wings and Senators go ahead of them would be a surprise to me at this point.
Fair. Yeah, no, I absolutely like I get that, but I don't know. It's more my gut more than anything else, at least with the Bruins. But anyway, we can move on. I think we'll get plenty more opportunities to talk about the rest of this old guard, because that's all going to be coming up here. But I guess why don't we go to your sixth spot? Who do you have in sixth?
Sure. So at my sixth spot, I have a team, like we can transition right into them. I think that my 5 and 6 was the hardest to pick between, and we've already been kind of window dressing this for the entire thing. Am I allowed to make a last second switch? Honestly, I might.
If you want to, yeah. I mean,
I'm calling an audible on it. I originally had Ottawa in the 6th spot, but I think you've convinced me to a certain extent. I'm moving Ottawa up to 5.
Okay.
So we'll table the Ottawa discussion. We'll table it, and we'll talk about the Red Wings, because I think the Red Wings are going to be in my 6th spot instead.
Yes. And I'll just add on to this quickly before tossing it back over to you, just by saying I have the Red Wings at 5th. So again, I kind of said it when we were talking about the Bruins. Red Wings and Bruins are very swappable to me. I absolutely think that the Bruins still have the firepower to be able to pass the Red Wings here. It's maybe my optimism on my part to think I kind of want to see a little bit. I want to see this division get messed up a little bit. I want to see some of the younger teams kind of show up a little bit. And I think the Bruins are going to be the biggest team out of those 3 to fall, which sucks because that means that there's not going to be a Maple Leafs beater in the first round anymore, which is really lame. But I don't know what they're going to do anymore. They're going to have to start losing to the Red Wings in the first round? That's not as fun. It's gonna be interesting. Anyway, I'll toss it back over to you. I just wanted to say that, because I think that me and you are closer on this than maybe at first it seemed.
Yeah. I think so too. I think the big disagreement is more so just in the Bruins part of it. But in terms of why I kind of made that last second switch on the Sens, I don't think I fully processed the whole Allmark thing, because I do think that makes a big difference. And I mean, you look at the young talent scattered across this Senators roster, and it is quite impressive. Even looking into that, as deep as that third line, a third line of David Perron, Shane.
I don't want to talk about the Senators yet. I want to table the Senators, but
we'll table the Senators. This is window dressing for my Red Wings.
Yes.
Take, but I will say, just looking at that depth of Ottawa, to say David Perron, Sean Pinto, Michael Amadio, that's a solid third line, to the point where I'm okay, well let's see what Detroit has, and it's just I think of Detroit often in the same kind of way, where it's oh yeah, young team, lots of core young talent, whatever. But it's pretty clear the difference between the two when I look at Ottawa, who is just anchored by young players like Pinto, a Josh Norris, a Tim Stützle,
they've got
Drake Batherson,
insane
anchored. Exactly, anchored throughout every point in that lineup. And then I look at Detroit, and it's first line. Oh yeah, that's a great first line. Dylan Larkin, Luke, and Raymond. Okay, yeah, here we go. We're starting off great.
That second line has a combined age of 48, or you know what I mean,
because
an average age.
I'm looking at that second line, and I'm thinking, Tarasenko and Kane. It's those are the pieces at this point that have been used to, add to a team that's ready to win, right?
How old is
but
JT
they're going to have to be key contributors, because the depth just drops off a cliff after that first line. Really, it's not Tarasenko and Kane are going to be bad, but you expect them to be more like slotted in on a second line with 2 other young stars, or like on a third line playing like really good third line minutes and just like being an awesome depth player at this point in their careers. But that's not how the Red Wings are turning out. And in my mind, I thought they had a lot more depth than they actually do. It's just really concerning. And I mean, goalie, you're taking crapshoots in the dark basically, because that situation was kind of a disaster. And you're bringing in
Talbot is an upgrade.
Talbot is an upgrade.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I don't know. It just feels like they're kind of that very much feels like it's just grab the best guy available. I don't know. There's a lot of concerns for me up and down this lineup, and it's really it really kind of hurts to see, because at a certain point you're thinking like, I think I projected the Red Wings to go into the playoffs last year. They had those years where they were just so terrible, and all for what? Because I don't think this team is going to get them any further. Because the young talent that I think I just characterized in my head that it was there, it's really not there past the billboard players. And that's really disappointing for the Red Wings.
This team
and that's why I think both of us have them kind of either on the fringes or missing out on a playoff spot.
Yeah, this team would have been absolutely bonkers in like 2017. Like, it would have been absolutely nuts to watch. But it's not 2017. That is the tough thing. And I do like it. I do like it a lot. In fact, my swap that I did earlier was similar to yours in the sense of, actually, it was swapping, I believe, the Red Wings and the Senators as well, with Senators going a little bit higher than maybe you had them. But anyway, again, tabling that, we'll talk about it. But Red Wings are a weird team. I have them in 5th. I think that it's weird because I do like a lot of what they have done. Alex DeBrincat is great. Dylan Larkin's great. Lucas Raymond is great. I still think that Kane is a fairly solid second liner. I think having Kane as a second liner is fairly solid. And I do think that he's quite a bit. I think Tarasenko at this point, I agree with what you said about him. I think Kane's a little bit better than you're giving him credit for. He's still maybe not a first line center, but fringe first line. If he's on your first line, I'm not going to go like, well, you're screwed. As a second liner, Patrick Kane is still elite. Vladimir Tarasenko, starting to lose me there. Like, seconds, if they had another winger to slot in there and they had Tarasenko on a third line, Tarasenko's an elite third liner. Like, he's an elite third liner. But, like, second liner, sure. It's not terrible, but it's fine. And then the rest of the depth is just kind of, it's middle of the road. It's average. I think, and that could be said about a lot of these teams, this team. Like, they have a lot of guys like, obviously, Moritz Seider, great player in his own right. And then the rest of the defense is kind of just average. Again, I think Simon Edvinsson is starting to have a bit of he's kind of on the up. He's another prospect who's probably going to get some good minutes this year with a depleted defensive core for them. But, yeah, I don't know. They need a few guys to step up. That is definitely for sure. And then, obviously, Cam Talbot is going to have to play as well as he has ever been at certain points, like he was last year for LA and the year before for Minnesota. Like, I think he's really got to play well. And yeah, that's pretty much all
he's shown he can do it.
He can.
He's shown he can do it, but I don't necessarily know if that'll be enough.
Defenses. I will
exactly
add that. LA was incredible defensively last season. I would not say the same about this Detroit team. I think that it wouldn't surprise me if he comes out and struggles at the beginning of this year. Like, I mean, just think about it like this. He had an incredible crutch in that style that LA played. Like, he didn't necessarily have to be anything insane to put up good numbers. This year, he is going to have to make 30 saves a night for them to win games, just as a whole. Like, their offense, if Detroit is good this year, mark my words, it'll be because they are winning firefights with teams on a weekly basis, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, anyway. I think I honestly have a little bit more faith not that it's anything crazy. I think I have a little bit more faith in the defense than you do. Like
Okay.
a third pairing of Gustafson and Olimata is not anything like to cry at.
The thing is, I don't think that's their worst pairing. That's the really funny thing.
Are you looking at the Edvinson and Petrie?
Yeah, maybe I'm just under. Oh my gosh, did I? Oh, what just happened? Caleb?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
That was really funny.
Double tapping the side of my headphones hangs up the call. These are new headphones. I'm learning these things.
Anyway, yeah, I am looking at that line. I think, and it's mainly for Simon Edvinson. I just think that he's a very raw prospect still. I mean, it's not like I go and watch the preseason games for Detroit. It's not like I really know. So Detroit fans who are going to come at me and go, actually Simon Edvinson had the best preseason out of anybody on the team this year, and he's going to be great this year. I apologize and I'm sorry, but I didn't know that. I can't say I was tuning into Detroit preseason games. But as far as I know about him as a prospect, I feel like it's pretty early to be having him already slotted into that second spot. I do think their true second defensive line is absolutely Olli Mata and Eric Gustafson. Jeff Petrie's fine. Like I said, I think it's average. I think this defensive core is average. But I have a tough time giving it anything more than that.
Okay. I think with how you were setting it up there, I think it was going to be like it was feeling worse than average, and I wouldn't say that. Like especially with
if I made it sound like that. Yeah, I think they're average.
Okay.
This is the 15th best.
I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, 15th, 16th best defensive core in the NHL, right?
I can vibe with that.
Yeah, it's just I want to emphasize what Cam Talbot is used to is the best defensive team in the NHL, which
fair enough.
Maybe second best, because I think Florida maybe has that beat after the playoff run we just saw. But I think other than Florida, LA last year at points looked like absolutely give them top 3 best defensive teams in the NHL.
Yeah.
Detroit is not going to be anywhere near that. Even their elite defensive guys, like let's say Edvinson, turns into a rookie of the year type candidate. Has he played? How many games has he played in the NHL? It's gonna be really funny if I find out. He
has played 25.
Okay, so he's still eligible.
Total.
Yeah, he's still eligible.
Total.
So yeah, I can say that. Let's say Simon Edvinson has a rookie of the year type campaign. Moritz Seider looks as good as he has ever looked. I still think both of those guys are more offensively inclined than they are defensively, right? I still don't think that that's going to necessarily save Cam Talbot. So at least for me, this Detroit team is kind of what you were saying about Boston, and with the fact of you want to see a few teams prove some stuff to you before you pick them. That's kind of my thing with Detroit, I think, is I want to see Detroit really do something this year to prove me wrong. But looking at this team, I'm not too confident on a lot. I'm more confident than I am in Buffalo. I think that they've done a better job adding and patching up a few holes. But I don't think that I would have preferred they would have tried a few things that would have been a bit more permanent. I would have liked to see them be. I think they were in the running for Linus Ullmark, but let's say they got Ullmark. Let's say they did something like that, right? I think I'd be a lot more happy with this Detroit team than I am right now while looking at them.
Yeah. No, that's very fair. We've talked about talked about Detroit for a while. Do we want to move into?
We should. Now
your top 4. Who do you have in the 4th spot?
So. Continuing down the rabbit hole of holy shit, Simon's gonna get murdered in a parking lot later. You're gonna think this is nuts, Caleb. This one you're gonna disagree with me.
I think probably, but I think I already know what it is.
Do you? Okay. So.
I think I do.
Well, I guess we were talking about it before, so maybe you could have kind of sniffed it out a little bit. But I have a team. They, again, absolute dynasty. absolute dynasty at points in the last little bit here. But they lost a massive piece this year. And you know what's funny? I think they did a great job replacing him in getting Jake Gensel. But God, their depth is brutal. It's really interesting. Like you'd think that they'd have a few more pieces like spread out throughout. But yeah, I don't think Tampa Bay is going to be that crazy this year. I think that there may be a wild card at best. I think that and you know what's funny? I think they're the type of wild card team where they'll make it to the show, they'll make it to the playoffs, and they're gonna surprise someone. I made the joke before that it's funny because if Boston doesn't make the playoffs, then we won't have a team to beat Toronto in the first round. Tampa's gonna be the team that beats Toronto in the first round because of the fact that I think that's just the type of team that they have this year, where they're just kind of they're okay. Like they're better than Detroit. I think that they're a step above them, and I think that the biggest reason behind that is we know that Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov, and Victor Hedman can all elevate this team to do absolutely nuts things that they normally can't, right? And I don't know. I think they're gonna pull this team further than they probably should. I do think that any of those players go down with an injury here, they're going to be in a pretty shit spot. I do think that is the biggest thing. If they stay healthy, their ceiling is okay, that might be a bit mean, but their ceiling is like maybe a little bit higher than a wild card, maybe the 6th spot in the conference, like that type of thing. I think that and then I think if someone gets hurt, they fall out of the playoffs completely. Which is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy that Tampa's in this spot, but I don't think that's that crazy to say. At least to me.
I think they're on the downswing, but I wouldn't go saying that. Because I look at this team and you talk about the depth falling off a cliff, and I mean, obviously from the championship days it has. I do think to a certain extent, like their championship run days, those are over. I don't think they're going to contend in that kind of way again. But I do think they're still a playoff team. Because you talk about depth on a lot of these teams. And while there are still a lot of like, who the hell is this guy? There's a couple of those on Tampa Bay. Like, who is Mitchell Chaffee and who is J.J. Moser? But the rest of I'm not gonna lie. Like, a lot of the forward depth on this Tampa roster, I do think is being a bit undersold. Like a third line of Nick Paul, Connor Geekie, and Cam Atkinson is actually pretty solid. And I think it'll at least like keep them afloat to where the top talents can continue to rise. And you talk about like losing a big piece in Stamkos. I think they've absolutely upgraded by quite a bit in that regard. Because I mean, Stamkos obviously like he's still part of the Lightning organization, but Gensel has just been on another level, and I think age has to play into it at a certain point. Stamkos was not necessarily the same player that he's been at the peak of his career, and I think Jake Gensel is entering the peak of his career. So in terms of that just being kind of like a free agency swap, I think that's a great move. So yes, there are concerns, and yes, they don't have the kind of like insane depth that they would have had in their like 2015 to 2021 stretch or whatever time period you want to fix in on. They don't have that same depth. That's why they're not first. That's why we're not probably going to say like, oh, Stanley Cup Finals, here we come. But I think going as far as to say, yeah, they're kind of like on the outside looking in terms of like probably a wild card spot and even falling off if somebody gets hurt for a bit, that's a bit too far in my estimation of it. I do think the depth piece as well, they're not quite to the same extent they were before. It's still okay enough, and you have Vasilevsky, that's always going to be a safety net to get them into one of those guaranteed playoff spots. Is the top 3 in the division. In my picks, I have them at 3rd.
Okay. Yeah, well, you know what the funny thing is? We have them separated by one,
They're-
right? That's
yeah,
the thing.
it's not
Like,
that far
I
off.
said,
I think it's just in the context of it and how you talk about
yes.
the team,
Oh,
right?
absolutely, yes.
Our-
And I want to say the
Yeah.
reason I talk about it in a negative fashion is the fact that last year, I believe they were actually, funnily enough, they were exactly where I have them. They were fourth.
Well, but I will say that is because they didn't have Vasilevsky for the majority
Yeah,
of the start of the year,
yeah.
and I think that will buoy them up. I don't see them as getting any like that much better or worse from last year. Their depth is worse, but I think Gensel makes them better. That's why I think
That's so tough
with
for me,
the
though. Like,
addition of Vasilevsky
all
back
of
there, I think
the-
it levels out.
all of the things that you think Gensel adds over Stamkos, I think gets dropped off tenfold by losing Stamkos in that locker room. Because I just think that he was such a leader in that room. And even if Gensel is coming into the prime of his career, he is not. And they talked about this. Like, there were plenty. I think Cooper came out in an interview here and basically just went, Gensel is not our Stamkos replacement. He is Jake Gensel. He is just who he is. We brought him in because we think he's an elite player, but do not look at him as a Steven Stamkos replacement because he's not that, right? Because you can't replace Steven Stamkos in that locker room, in that community. You can't replace Stamkos. That's just not something that's going to happen. I think that impact can't really be emphasized more than that. I think losing him is going to have an impact one way or another more than you think. And I do think that because of that, I wouldn't be surprised to see them like stall off a little bit, maybe at a certain point in the year. I don't think fourth is crazy. And that's still like I said, that's still wild card. So
yeah. And I will say, but to end it off before we go to your number 3 team, I think you're right in that losing that voice in the locker room matters. But I do think the culture has been established. John Cooper has been the longest serving. I believe he's the longest serving coach in the NHL at this point. If he's not, he's close.
He's got to be, right?
And
like, who else?
You have enough. Yeah, exactly. And you have enough veterans in that locker room who have been there for the whole Stanley Cup run to establish a culture. Losing Stamkos definitely hurts in that realm. You're definitely onto something there. But I don't think it's going to be enough to where they're like, oh, yeah, the Lightning have fallen off a cliff or something this year. But we can move on to your number 3 team.
All right, Caleb.
Which I think I know at this point.
Oh gosh, I mean, who else would it be? I'm crazy, but I'm not that crazy. Yeah. I've got the Ottawa Senators here. I think that this team. What do you know about the Ottawa Senators this year? Because they're gonna be nuts. I think that this is the year. And I know we've been saying it. Everybody's been screaming at a wall. This is the year for the Ottawa Senators for like the last 4 seasons. But Caleb, Kyle Pitt's breakout season. Ottawa Senators to the playoffs. It's gonna happen this year. It's gotta be this year. I mean, like last year, the big reason that everybody thought it was gonna happen was they brought in Korpisalo. They finally have a real goalie. Korpisalo sucked. Okay, next guy. Then they bring in Linus Ullmark, former Vezina winner. This guy's gotta be the guy, right? It's gonna be really funny if next year they've got a new starter. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But I really like Linus Ullmark. I think that everything that I remember last year with the Ottawa Senators, I had a lot of good things to say about them. I remember thinking that Korpisalo was going to push them a lot further. Everything I said last year, tenfold with Ullmark. Ullmark is going to be massive for them in net. I really like their defensive core. I think they're really deep. I think across the board, just in general, this team's so good. I mean, you pointed it out as well when you were talking about like your what you had for this team. I mean, they're just insane kind of across the board. Lots of center depth, lots of winger depth. Their top 6 is great. I love that top line. I mean, they've had it for the last few years now, but Stützle, Giroux, and Tkachuk is fun. I don't know. I love this Ottawa team this year. I think that they're going to be really good. I mean, we'll talk about it when we eventually get to the playoffs here. But I personally think that this team is going to surprise a lot of people, especially come April.
Wow. Again, I'm not necessarily that high. I'm very confident now in the switch I've made in terms of putting the Senators up to 5th in my rankings. Because yes, I do think out of all the teams, like I think you've made the case for it in terms of out of those that group of 3 teams that we identified before, they're definitely the furthest along. But I still harbor doubts, and I won't spend too much time on it because I do think I agree with you on a lot of stuff. I just think disagreeing on the extent to which it impacts.
Okay.
Because the roster is more or less the same. Adding Allmark, I think, boosts them a lot. But I think a boost from 7th to 5th is a lot more reasonable than a boost from 7th to 3rd. Because the rest of the roster is more or less the same.
Senators? They're gonna be nuts this year.
We'll see. It's a hard division. And I think
absolutely very tough.
And again, I will just continue to go back to what I said when we talked about the Bruins. Until I am proven wrong, until we see cracks in the foundation, I am going to take the 4 teams with the established culture over the 3 teams that have potential and young talent but no established culture. Because it's going to have to be a changing of the guard at some point, yes. But as long as those structures in place, I'd feel like I don't necessarily have a reason to break with that. So Senators definitely is the best of those teams, though. The in 5th, having them potentially as a wild card team, depending on how the Metro plays out. We'll get to that eventually. But yeah, 3 is a little rich for my blood, but I definitely get being high on them.
Yeah. No, that is the thing. I feel like you definitely have the more like neutral safe picks. I want to make a point here saying that I think that this will be the year. I want to be the guy come back here at the end of the season when the Ottawa Senators go absolutely fucking nuts, or if they're picking first for the NHL draft and taking like what's his name? whoever the hell's the first overall pick this year. I don't even remember right now. I don't know.
Is it Gavin McKenna?
It is Gavin McKenna. Fuck. You're totally right. Okay, never mind. Whatever. When they're taking Gavin McKenna, also come back here and say, ha ha ha, Simon, you smelly boy, what do you know about hockey? Make sure you say that. Remember to do that. Anyway, we can move on.
I will say, I think your pick for number 2 and 1 might have been spoiled with what's on the screen currently.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. I'm going to put a little black bar over top of that. I'm going to write that down. Caleb, you didn't see that. Shut the hell up.
Yeah, sure. I won't mention anything. You can write a note to yourself on that one.
Black bar over spoilers at 48 minutes. Second time I did that today. I'm on fire. Anyway, in second...
We can get to number 2, which I definitely don't know who it is.
Yeah, Caleb doesn't know who it is, and you don't either. Shut the hell up. The audio listeners, I know you were peeking. Don't you dare spoil it for anybody else. Anyway, at number 2, for me anyway, Caleb, I don't know what you got. Actually, I do, because I'm also peeking at your piece of paper, you piece of trash. But at number 2, I have the best first-round exit team in the NHL. Absolutely elite at what they do. 50 wins every year. First-round exit every year. They're insane. They've got it down to a formula, down to a T. The second place, Toronto Maple Leafs. I think that they are going to have I like their team a lot this season. I think that they are really, really solid. But if you want to know the exact reason why I don't have them in number 1, it's because the Florida Panthers play in the Atlantic Division, and it doesn't go further than that. I like this Toronto team. I like the additions they have. I love that they brought in Chris Tanev. Oliver Ekman-Larsson is also a great addition, in my opinion. I think he's going to be fairly solid for them. I think an offensive defenseman like power play quarterback is not a bad person to throw in that role, especially with a guy like Chris Tanev, obviously pure defense, scores like 2 goals a season. But he also gets scored on like twice a season. So I mean it kind of evens out. So I think with Toronto, I'm super high on them. I think they're great. I think everything they've done is perfect. I can't think of a single other thing that I would change about this team to really make a run into the playoffs, other than the fact that their goalies are not very well proven, but I'll give them a pass on that one because everything else is pretty much perfect. Still a first round exit because they fucking suck.
Yeah, we won't talk about the playoffs yet. However, I do disagree here, and I do not have the Leafs in second, and maybe this might be my surprise pick. You said I had some safe picks here. This maybe isn't anything too crazy because I
don't know. Florida's pretty nuts.
Looking, Florida obviously defending Stanley Cup champion. There's a reason why they won the cup. That roster is crazy. They did a good job to retain a lot of their key pieces. However, they did get poached. Like the Panthers, very much as any Stanley Cup winning team, with the amount of expiring contracts that they have, they got poached to a big extent, to where I'm looking at that roster and there's a lot of players that were on that. There were key contributors to that Stanley Cup team. And I'm looking at it now, and I'm like, their
second
core
line
is still there.
Their second line is Sam Bennett, Matthew Tkachuk, and Evan Rodriguez. That's fucking insane.
And I have the Panthers in second place in a very good division.
Yeah.
Probably, depending on how the Metro goes, like good enough for second in the conference potentially. But yeah, after that second line, I start to kind of sweat a little bit. To that bottom six kind of scares me. Lundell and Lester Ryan were there before, but past that, I'm kind of like, I don't know, is that really what we're going with? You lose Montour on the defensive side.
Yes, that's big.
I don't know. Just in terms of like pure roster construction, I'm a lot more confident in the Leafs because as much as we've kind of gotten on the Leafs for depth concerns in the past few years, I think their depth looks pretty damn good. Like this whole roster, I mean, you can have some concerns up and down. Like, is Ryan Reeves really a good player to have on your roster? I don't know. Brad Treliving, is he? But like David Kampf has been a solid fourth line center for him. That third line, Pacioretty, Nick Robertson on the third line is pretty solid. That defense, speaking of poaching guys from Florida, Oliver Ekman-Larsson is not going to be like anything crazy for you, but to have him on a second pair with Jake McCabe, I think that'll actually be pretty good. Morgan Riley, and I think you brought up at a certain point Chris Tanev. That's going to be spectacular. That's an awesome pairing of just like you get probably one of the best offensive defensemen in the league and one of the best defensive defensemen in the league. I think that's going to be awesome. We've seen Chris Tanev make his partners better. That's an awesome D pairing. The question is in goal.
Morgan Riley totally might be somebody I'd have on. Already a fairly elite defenseman in his own right. Maybe a guy that I'd have on breakout season alert right there, as a guy who could maybe. I mean, when you have Tanev on the other side of you can certainly skate up the ice a little bit more. Just saying.
Exactly.
He had that one season where he like started really strong. I don't know if I'd be too surprised if we saw a similar thing happen here.
No, I think that's an amazing pairing. It's clear they're kind of going all in. Just like on paper, this roster really looks the part. And another thing, like to kind of there is like some maybe concerns. Like I don't know, like Steven Lorentz on the fourth line, but then you realize like, oh, they have Calle Yarncroke that they can throw in there once he comes back from a day-to-day injury. It's like top to bottom. This roster construction right now looks better to me on paper than Florida just because of all that Florida has lost. but I will. This doesn't mean anything for the playoffs because that's an entirely different
Yes.
beast. But in terms of pure regular season success, it's something that the Leafs have always been good at. The playoffs, again, different beast. But the regular season success, the Leafs have always been amazing at that because they have the roster to make it work and sustain over an 82 game season. I think the Panthers will be close. I think it's decided by maybe like the separation of like 2 to 4 points, maybe like a couple wins here and there. We'll get it done. But I think that Toronto's going to come out on top in this division. In the playoffs, we'll see. We'll see where that goes. But for the regular season, I have the Leafs over the Panthers in a bit of a surprise, just because with the amount of losses that the Panthers have, I think you take a step back, and I do think Toronto's gotten a lot better than people might have expected.
But with all of those losses, there is one massive addition for Florida that I don't think a lot of people are necessarily thinking about. And it's a player that's been on their roster for a long time, but from all the reports that I've been reading in the last 2 minutes while you were talking there, it sounds like they are officially getting him back here. And the one big nitpick with Toronto is I personally think that you could put both of their goalies in a blender and put all of their skills together, and they still would be nowhere close to anywhere as good as the Florida Panthers backup and Spencer Knight. They have 2 elite starters if Knight can bounce back here. They have 2 elite starters pretty much sharing the crease. I think that I hate Toronto's goaltending. That's the big thing for me. That's kind of what I'm trying to say here. I
do think Wall is better than you might expect. Like he played
better
pretty
than
well
Knight?
last year. Knight has a lot to Knight has a lot to prove.
Sure, considering he's coming back.
I'm not saying that Toronto's goaltending situation is better than Florida's, because obviously it isn't.
No, yeah.
But I don't think it's going. It's a major concern. But I don't think that's going to tip the scales for me. I don't think that one tick in Florida's area, like that battle goes to Florida. I don't think it's going to win the war.
Joseph Wall, 12 for 11 in 25 games, nearly a 3.0 goals against average, 907. Like, yeah, obviously good in the playoffs. That's the big one right there. Yeah, good in the playoffs, which is pretty big for Toronto. But I don't know. I liked Spencer Knight when he got in games. Obviously, before he had to leave for non-hockey related reasons. I think if he's back, like for real, he's back and ready to go. I think that's a huge addition for Florida, because I think that takes a massive amount off of Bobrovsky's workload. And I honestly think that it's like we talked about with Boston. A big reason that I had them falling off is I think losing losing Ullmark is gonna hurt them. I think losing that guy, being able to swap back and forth between 2 elite goalies, is just such an insane advantage. And I think Florida's going to have that this year. If Spencer Knight can bounce back and be the same goalie that we saw him be, and truthfully, I don't see a lot of reasons why he can't. It's not like he had any massive injury concerns. Like, it was all outside of, like I said, non-hockey related reasons. I don't personally remember the exact reasons that he ended up leaving, so I'm not going to try and guess. But I think what I do remember is it's not injury concerns. There's not really anything physically that would make you think that he's not going to be able to bounce back here. I think that that's a massive addition for them. And while I know losing Montour sucks, that's going to hurt them. I don't think that it's going to hurt them enough to make me think. And plus, what we saw from them defensively with their system, with Barkov as well, they have the best defensive center in hockey. Like, all of those things are going to help them out when they have a worse defense like this. Like, they were easily the best defensive team in the NHL, especially in the playoffs last year. Losing Montour sucks. That move maybe moves them down to, like, 5th. Like, I still think that they're one of the best defensive teams in hockey, just across the board. I love this Florida team. I have a really tough time putting them over or under Toronto. And, again, It's mainly I just don't think Joseph Wall is going to be good enough. I don't think that. I mean, I don't know. I get it, but I don't think he's going to be good enough.
No, it's definitely a concern, but I think it is one that can be overcome. Because I think expectations are going to be higher. There's a lot of turnover. And again, I want to stress that this doesn't mean I think the Panthers are falling off a cliff. It just means I think the Leafs beat them out by a couple games to take the division. Because I think they've got the stronger depth and the overall stronger roster, even if the goaltending is weaker. But it'll be an interesting fight. It's a very, very interesting division, especially in terms of how. Because I think you gotta watch out for a lot of these established contenders, especially the Lightning and Bruins, kind of maybe falling off, and then you've got some of the younger teams maybe on the come up. It's one that I'm definitely going to keep an eye on going into the season.
Yep, nope, for sure. But that does it. We got through the Atlantic in 2 1-hour segments this week. We covered everything we needed to cover. We managed to get everything. Me and you ended up being. I honestly don't even remember at this point. Like, if we want to run through it at the end here, because I think we forgot last week, and I was thinking that we should try and do that just to with how long the segments are. But for me, Panthers number 1, Maple Leafs number 2, Senators number 3, Lightning number 4, Red Wings number 5, Bruins number 6, Sabres number 7, and Canadiens number 8.
Yep, and I had Leafs number 1, Panthers 2, Lightning 3, Bruins 4, Sens 5, Red Wings 6, Sabres at 7, Canadiens at 8.
Yeah. So actually, we did have a lot of differences then. We ended up being fairly different on this side, which makes it more fun. I think that shows just how insane this division is going to be this year. I mean, it's the same thing with the Central in a lot of ways. We had the same struggles there, where like there's just so many good teams, especially in the middle. And you can make the same argument that it's the same problem here. I think the Metropolitan is going to be fun as well, but I do think that these two, the two middle of the land, of North America. You know what I mean? I'm tired. Anyway, probably the most interesting. But yeah, next up, outro probably. Yeah.